Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Matt Greer. I'm the music director here at St. John's United Methodist Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm welcoming you to another of our Wednesday live stream concerts. We are so pleased you are with us. We have been doing these most weeks since lockdown began for a couple of reasons. One is to provide a venue for wonderful musicians to continue to make music. Another is to continue to provide music to the St. John's community and to the Albuquerque community at large. And the third is to lift up the work of a wonderful organization in Albuquerque with whom the music ministry at St. John's has partnered for over 10 years, and that's Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless. You see a link in the chat box that you can easily click on to donate to them. They have done important work in our community for such a long time, and the work that they are doing in this particular time is particularly important. So we would invite you to give generously as you enjoy today's music. Today is Ash Wednesday, of course, and we have a worship service happening today as well, which will also be live streamed from our sanctuary this evening at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So we would invite you to come and worship with us if you are looking for a way to honor Ash Wednesday. And in order to participate in that service, we would invite you to provide your own ashes if you want to participate in the full liturgy. That can be as simple as soil from a houseplant or your front yard. But if you have that at the ready, you'll be able to participate more fully in our service. That's this evening at 6:30 Mountain Time. When I thought today what might be a good concert to offer on this Ash Wednesday, I thought immediately of my friend Joel Becktell. Joel is a tremendously accomplished and talented musician who happens to reside in Albuquerque, but really plays all over the country when times are normal. And he has been a good friend to St. John's over the years. We're so happy he's with us today for a special solo concert. Welcome, Joel Becktell.
That was a work by David Popper, a late 18th and early 19th century cellist. And if you happen to be a cellist listening to this, then the David Popper needs no introduction. But if you're not a cellist, chances are good you've never heard of him. But he was definitely he was the Yo-Yo Ma of his generation. He died in 1913 and was born in Prague and lived in different places in Europe. And he wrote quite a bit of music for himself to play in concerts. And then he wrote another kind of music. And we'll be hearing some other examples of this kind of music. And that's pieces for the cello that are rarely, if ever, heard outside of a practice room or a cello teacher's studio. because they either were intended as or have been subsequently relegated to a role as, I guess, pedagogical pieces, pieces for training cellists how to play the cello. And as a student and teacher, of course, played these all the time, and it always occurred to me that these pieces were just too good to be ignored as music. They're the kinds of things that after you practice them for a while, you find them kind of sticking in your head and you think, wow, that's really good. I like that piece. And so instead of just leaving them on the music stand in the studio, I thought it might be fun to play a few such pieces today. So that was an etude from the it's usually translated as the High School for Cello. It's actually really like the Advanced School for Cello by David Popper, and there are 40 pieces in this book. This is a really thick book, and most cellists regard it as sort of one of the great pillars of the literature for our instrument, even though we are almost never given a chance to share it. So that was a chance to hear a little bit of that book. Another famous cellist in his day that is essentially unheard of today is Sebastian Lee. And Lee was born in Germany and before long was proficient enough on his instrument to start touring around the world. And he landed up in Paris, where after a few concerts, he gained enough notice to be appointed to the opera orchestra there. And for quite a few years, he was the solo cellist of the opera in Paris. And then he was appointed to the Paris Conservatory. And he also wrote a bunch of pedagogical pieces, actually quite a lot of them. And so many, in fact, that I don't even know how many. And it's a lot of fun to get to explore them. And it's another one of those cases where probably one of his most famous books is his Melodic Studies for cello. It's actually 2 books. And I just find that Lee is one of those composers who is unfailingly charming. And some of his music is just little 8-bar duets for absolute beginners on the cello. And even those are just the kind of thing that you enjoy, and they're just very pleasant and charming. Well, when deciding to bring one of his pieces out of the practice room, I just flipped open the book and I noticed this one. It's a theme with variations. So right from the beginning, you get the idea that this isn't just for teaching the cello. It has a nice musical form to it. So he wrote this beautiful lyrical theme, and then he does 2 variations on it where he kind of, all those big open spaces in the lyricism get filled in with sort of perpetual motion, just as ways of reinterpreting that theme. And then it ends with kind of a big rush to the end. charming? Books and books of pieces by Sebastian Lee that are just as charming and delicate as that. Lee he was born in about 1805, so imagine that he was born into the thick of Beethoven and the great transition from the classic era to the romantic era. But I think that having made his living in an opera orchestra gave him, especially a Paris opera orchestra, gave him that sort of light and charming influence. So I got one more piece from the practice room to share, and this is by the great Italian 19th century cellist Alfredo Piatti. And he wrote quite a lot of concert music. In fact, he even wrote, believe it or not, he wrote songs to be accompanied by the cello. These pieces are almost entirely outside the repertoire. A dear friend of mine recorded some of them, Mark Moskovitz. You can find that probably online. Pieces for solo cello and for cello and voice, and they really are delightful. But he also wrote a dozen pieces which he calls caprices. And I think that might be a hint that they weren't entirely intended as instructional pieces. But Piatti, amazing, all of these guys have amazing stories, actually, the more you dig into them. But one of the most amazing stories about Piatti, he started in a small town, and his great uncle was his teacher. And then after he'd been playing for just a short time, his grandfather got him a job in a theater orchestra, and he kept the job for a couple of months. But as his agent, the grandfather took half the money. Make of that what you will, but an even more astounding story is that shortly after that job ended, Piatti went on a tour, and he was highly regarded. He was still a teenager, but everyone thought that he was, and he was, a great cellist, but the concert tour wasn't going that well. He wasn't selling that many tickets, and then, worst of all, he got sick, and he didn't have money to pay the doctor, so he had to sell his cello to pay the doctor while on tour. And there he was, stuck, no more way to play concerts. But he got invited to a party, and at this party there was some music and musicians, and he borrowed a cello, and he played for the party goers. And in that audience of that party was one Franz Liszt, the great pianist and heartthrob of the mid-19th century. And Liszt was so astounded and entranced by his playing that he bought him a cello. And he was able to, Piatti was able to continue his tour. I don't know if that was the great Stradivari cello that is now known as the Piatti that Liszt bought for him, but I like to think it was. This is a Caprice number 1 from his set of 12. So that's Alfredo Piatti. Again, there's a dozen of those, and I've been thinking about it here during COVID time. Those are pieces that are just too good to leave on the stand in the music studio. So I'll be exploring those some more, and encourage everyone else to do that as well. The next piece, big change of pace. It's by the great Hungarian composer György Ligeti. And if you're familiar with that name, don't worry. He was known as an avant-garde firebrand, but this piece comes from a very different place. Of course, Hungary, I think certainly one of the most musically literate, probably the most musically literate country in the world. And the great Hungarian composers that we all know of, Bartók and Kodály, and maybe less known, but I think right up there with them, Ernő von Dohnányi, and then in a later generation, Ligeti. But all of these guys had one thing very much in common. They were inspired on a very deep level by Hungarian folk music. And this piece has a little bit of that in its DNA. The story is quite interesting. Of course, those of us of a certain age remember very well that Hungary was one of the countries that found itself behind the Iron Curtain and under Soviet control, either direct or indirect, for decades. And Ligeti grew up, of course, before Hungary closed down, but when he was studying school in Budapest, he developed an affection for one of his fellow students, and he decided to write. She was a cellist, so he decided to write a piece for her. And in that piece, he envisioned the two of them talking, and so he entitled the piece Dialogue. And he gave it to her as a gift, and by all accounts, she said, "For me? Thanks," and stuck it in a drawer, and never even tried it. Poor thing. So that relationship never took off. But years later, when he was already a professional composer, he was asked to provide a solo work for a professional cellist, and he dusted off his copy of this and added another movement to it. They took it to what was then the council that decided whether a piece was permitted to be published or performed, and they turned him down. This was a Soviet-era censorship board, and they said, "Nope, this piece is too wild." Especially, I think they were thinking of the second movement. So again, don't worry. But the piece was not permitted. The piece was banned. And then, of course, fortunately, that regime came to an end, and the piece came out into the light, and I think you'll see it deserves to be an extremely popular and very moving sort of tale of a relationship. Maybe a fantastic one, but fantastical one. But you'll hear the two voices, the deeper voice of the composer and the higher voice of his inamorata. Seems like such a heartfelt piece, doesn't it? From György Ligeti, his dialogue. So, one more piece on today's program, and before I start playing that piece, it's by far the biggest piece of the group. I do want to commend you, please look on the sidebar or the comments or however you receive them, and notice the web address to donate to, I think, one of the finest organizations operating in Albuquerque, the Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless. They need our help, and we should help. So please, if you are in a position to do so, look them up, donate to them, and they're a worthy cause that Matt here at St. John's has been supporting for a long time, and highly deserving of our support. So 2021, actually here in just about a month, we'll celebrate the, I think, 336th, I think that's right, birthday of Johann Sebastian Bach. But 2021 has another important place in the Bach history, because it is the 5th annual 300th anniversary of the composition of his huge accomplishment, the 6 suites for solo cello. And we get to celebrate this anniversary year after year after year, because the fact is we just don't know exactly when they were composed. And maybe as early as 1717, maybe as late as 1730. So this is a celebration that's just going to keep on giving. Bach wrote these 6 suites, and for mysterious reasons, frankly, and they were copied out a few times by other musicians, and then they were relegated to just gather dust for about a century. There's no record of performances of them or anything like that. And then when the Bach Society of Germany and Austria decided to try to publish the complete works of Johann Sebastian Bach, this wonderful but little-known composer at the time, these pieces came to light, and they were authenticated, and they were published just in one of the great big volumes, and eventually came to the attention of cellists, really essentially not until the 20th century. In fact, I would say out of those composers that I played at the beginning of the program who lived anywhere between the early 1800s and the early 1900s, some of them probably never even heard of the suites, and I think none of them performed them at all. But now they're very popular, and deservedly so. And you could almost think of the suites in 2 groups. The first 3, which are written very much to exploit the cello's natural resonance, and then the next 3, which are 4, 5, and 6, which depart from sort of standard cello. The 6th suite is written for a 5-stringed cello. The 5th suite is written for a cello where the tuning is different. Instead of being like this, it's something else. And the 4th suite is a strange one, because it's written in a key that's not kind of a home key for the cello. It's written in E flat major. And we can definitely hear in this piece the style of Bach's mainstay as a musician. You can definitely hear the keyboard style, as you can easily imagine this having been a piece for harpsichord, especially the prelude. So here in celebration of the ongoing 300th anniversary of the suites, the 4th suite in E flat by Johann Sebastian Bach.